The United Nations has published a long-anticipated report about China and its alleged persecution of the Uyghur population. Now, Western nations are waving this report around gleefully, saying, see, this is damning. We told you China was doing all these bad things, right? China, on the other hand, about the report says this. This is their response today. This assessment is a patchwork of false information that serves as political tools for the U.S. and other Western countries to strategically use Xinjiang to contain China. This is from the Foreign Ministry spokesperson. It again shows that the UN Human Rights Office has been reduced to an enforcer and accomplice of the U.S. and other Western countries. So China's saying this is total crap. This is proof that the UN is in lockstep with Western nations. So let's go through it. Let's see what the United Nations actually says. Because, of course, most of us know, right, or have heard that, oh, China is persecuting the Uyghurs. We've heard words like genocide. We've heard words like forced sterilization. We've heard words like human rights abuse, forced labor camps, all of those things, right? So does the UN actually accuse China of these things? And did they actually observe this? The answer to that is no. They actually did not see any of these things, and they say so in their report. Now, I'm not going to say that these things do or do not happen. I've not seen it with my own eyes, right? I've seen many conflicting reports. I'm going to tell you what the United Nations actually says in this 41-page report, and you can sort of deduce for yourself, because they're saying, oh, read this report. This is clear human rights, one of the biggest human rights violations of all civilization, basically. But then when you read it, you're like, what? This is not a genocide. But that's not to say there's not maybe some racism or abuse there. So let's see what it is. Now, they tell us what their methods were, right? They say basically, in parallel, and further to its global mandate and under the General Assembly, blah, 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 what they did to write this report was continue to monitor the situation and assess the allegations by reviewing and critically analyzing publicly available official documentation. Okay, I could have done that, as well as research material, satellite imagery, and other open source information, examining their origin, credibility, weight, and reliability in line with the United Nations methodology.
So basically, we didn't leave our house. We just went to the internet and we just read a bunch of shit.
So, okay, so you did a content analysis. Valid, but then beyond that, right? Because you're the United Nations, you can't just use that. I also could write a report like that. They say by way of supplement to this extensive body of documentation, they also conducted 40 in-depth interviews, right, with individuals with direct and firsthand knowledge of this situation. 26 of these interviews had of these people had either been detained. They stated that they'd either been detained or had worked at various facilities, right? In each case, the United Nations assessed the reliability and credibility of these people, right? And so but most of these interviews were done remotely for COVID and or security reasons. Okay.
So they didn't go there. They just interviewed them via Zoom.
Well, okay. They did go there, but so here is the last part of their methodology says that they tried to get the High Commissioner to visit China in 2018, but then the pandemic happened in 2020. So what happened in those 2 years, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah.
And then the visit was postponed until March of 2022. They finally, sort of got their books out and were able to make it happen. And she did actually go in April and May of 2022. So it mentions a few times the High Commissioner who did go to China, Michelle Bachelet, but nowhere in this report are her firsthand accounts. I read it, and it doesn't say this is happening and she saw it, right? Or she said this or anything like that. And in fact, when she got back from this trip, she never said anything about human rights abuse, which is weird, right? In fact, the report reads very much like a copy and paste of what the West accuses China. And then some of their analysis, yeah, that probably happens. And we have some corroborating evidence.
So did she pull? I mean, I'm curious. I didn't go through the methodology and see what some of the sourcing was on this UN report, because I know you were diving deep into it. But I mean, we have like these big reports from the BBC, which have been discredited, right? Total propaganda, right?
Yeah.
The Associated Press, again, total propaganda. These articles.
Well, the Associated Press has recently gone there and said, we do not see any evidence of these camps. The Associated Press has even said,
oh yeah, they came out with their most recent, and they said, yeah,
yes.
In fact, we see we see education. They're doing pretty well.
So we're going to talk about what that was. Now, again, I want to be sensitive because some of these people interviewed maybe did have some awful experience. This is not all to say that China is blameless, but let's take a measured look at what are the allegations and what does the United Nations say. Now, first, regarding indoctrination. The narrative is that China is taking the Uyghurs, a Muslim population, and forcing them to stop practicing their religion and their culture. They say that they are reprogramming them into Chinese ways with their labor camps. So what are the labor camps? These are what are known as VETCs, or Vocational Educational Training in Xinjiang. These were born out of China's hard strike program. This is China's solution to terrorism, which the UN admits China has had. The US, you may know, also had problems with terrorists. What did they do? They used their military to bomb countries where they thought the terrorists were from. China, on the other hand, decided to fight extremism with education and rehabilitation, and this is what came of that, is these VETC camps.
So that's a really interesting tale of two different ways of dealing with terrorism, right? Because the idea is if you kill a terrorist, you're martyring these terrorists, and you kill one, you slice the head off of Al-Qaeda, then guess what pops up? Another or more. It's a hydra. You create more of them, right? You radicalize families. By killing civilians, you radicalize, right? Or you could maybe take this strategy, which is, instead of doing that, okay, let's have an education program that not honestly forces you, but really pushes you to learn maybe the error of your ways.
Well, it doesn't force you. That's the thing, right? So look at this screen here, has the conditions under which someone gets into a VETC camp. It says there are 3 categories in which these people are put in VETC camps. Let's see. And I know that this is text dense. I just want to make sure that you have it for yourself. The first is individuals who have been convicted of terrorist or extremist crimes, right? The second are people who have been incited, coerced, or induced into participating in terrorist or extremist activities. And the third is people who were incited, coerced, or induced into participating in terrorist or extremist activities, or people who participated in terrorist or extremist activities that posed a real danger but did not actually cause harm. So they're trying to find these people who are being indoctrinated into maybe terrorist organizations. Now, the United Nations takes issue with the way that terrorism is defined, because they say, well, you don't define it, it's too broad, and so people could just be practicing some social protest and be accused of terrorism. So they say some people might get caught in a dragnet when they're really not terrorists. They're just sort of normal social protesters. That's one thing, right? Now, these people who get into these VETC camps are supposed to have a choice to not go there. And the United Nations says that a lot of people here, they didn't realize they didn't have to go. If you look at this screen, they say that, they were forced into them. None of the interviewees felt that they could challenge the referral process. So they were referred to a camp and they didn't feel like they could say no. None had access to a lawyer prior to being sent there. Several underwent long interrogations, and they said once they were there, they couldn't leave, right? And then when they were there, the UN is saying that China put those people there for various reasons, and references this Caracax list, which they say appeared online, and they use this phrase. They said, it's likely authentic. That doesn't inspire confidence, right? You're the United Nations. You're supposed to be doing a report, so why don't you go figure out if it's authentic? But again, the UN went there. They worked with the Chinese government. Why didn't they ask about the Karakov list. Now, this is a list, if you look on this screen, which is a document that has a whole list of reasons that people might have been put into the VETC camps. Reasons include having too many children, being an unsafe person, being born in certain years, being an ex-convict, wearing a veil or a beard, having applied for a passport and not left the country, and so on. So this is a list. Like, obviously, China is saying the people in these camps have done things that really cause a threat to society. And this list says, well, some people are there for reasons that do not qualify, right? They also say, the United Nations says that the Uyghur population is overrepresented in these camps, and that's a bad sign. See here, it says based on the methodology employed. Now they don't have any counts of who was there. They don't know this. They're just basing this on methodology. They estimate that around 10 to 20% of the adult ethnic population in these countries and townships were subjected to some form of detention between 2017 and 2018. So 10 to 20% of the Uyghur population had been in a camp, which may or may not be proportional to the terrorism threats that China was experiencing, which the United Nations does admit. Look at number 13. Look at this laundry list of terrorist events that prompted China to start the hard strike program, right? Since 2014, 1,588 violent and terrorist gangs, arrested 12,995, seized 2,052 explosive devices. Like, this is a lot, right? So obviously a government's going to say, we got to do something about this. Also interesting, though, this made me think, if the United Nations really thinks it's a problem that one population is overrepresented in detention centers, what's it going to say about American prisons, I wonder, which are overrepresented by Black people, but only make up 14% of the American population, but over 40, by some estimates, 40 to 60% of American prisons.
We're not going to see a United Nations report on American human rights abuses.
No, but they're all in on these VETC camps, right? Now, the UN report the VETC camps are almost half of the 41 pages. And the interviewees reported, being beaten up. Here's a list of some of the things they say that happened to them. They were put in these tiger chairs. I had to Google it and I found this image. A tiger chair is when you're like strapped in like that, and then you get beaten by a baton. Subject to interrogation, water poured in their faces, prolonged solitary confinement, being forced to sit motionless on small stools. So I'm not saying any of this is great, right? It's not. Is this how you are to treat terrorists or rehabilitate people? Obviously, this is not a desirable way to treat any population, right? But given that these are such a big deal in the UN report, these VETC camps, you would think the UN would say, we need to see one, right? We need to see for ourselves. They did not. Instead, they said this. The government, which they're talking about China, has indicated that VETC facilities are now closed and that all trainees have graduated, thereby suggesting that these facilities may no longer be in use. The UN is not in a position to confirm this. What? Like, you're writing this report, half is it about these camps, but you're saying they may be closed. We're not sure. So what did the High Commissioner even do on her trip? Did she just take classes in how to use a wok? Like, what is this, right? I'm not saying these things were not bad. I don't know. And clearly the United Nations doesn't either, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I would love to go to this region. In fact, something we've been talking about. I mean, I would love to go and see for myself. You had a population where they experienced terrorism, right? I mean, that's well documented.
Right.
So is the solution then from the United Nations to follow the U.S. model, maybe just to bomb that part of your country? Like, maybe that would have been the better solution.
Yeah. Okay, so that's about the camps. Now let's talk about forced sterilization. This narrative has to do with the one China policy. You may know that until 2014, Chinese families were limited to only having one child. The Uyghurs were actually exempted from that even before 2014. They could, here was the change in 2016. Ethnic minorities such as the Uyghurs were allowed to have more than one child, meaning that Uyghurs could have two children urban couples and that rural ones could have 3. So then this is saying that in 2017, China amended this policy to permit people of all ethnic groups to have 2 children in the city and 3 children in the country. So this is where reports of forced sterilization come in. So keep in mind that the Uyghurs were always exempted from the one China policy. They could always have more children because it was a part of their religious belief. And then these are where the reports come in of several women raising allegations of forced birth control, forced IUD, and possible forced sterilization. Now, the United Nations goes on, number 113, to say that this is likely due to enforcement of the family planning policy. So now that everyone was given the equal rights to have kids, this is where this came in. That's not to say it's good, right? Nobody should force you on any contraception, but this is where they think this is. Okay, what about cultural attacks? Well, the UN says that mosques have been removed. How do they know? They looked at Google Images, right? So they give us this first Google Images of the Imam Asim Shrine, which they say, look, it was there in 2012, right? And then they give us another one saying, look, it was disappearing in 2017 and then all but gone in 2020. Again, they went there. They should ask questions. Where did it go? China says that these buildings were old and these were removed for whatever reason. I tried to find accounts from the Muslim community why this specific mosque was removed and didn't find any. So if any of our viewers know why, maybe you can give us more information than the United Nations found on their own.
It totally looks Photoshopped because it's like all that stuff is gone, but like the wind wouldn't have blown over all of those spots where stuff was. It's like, I don't know. I just find that kind of weird.
Well, also just think about like China's China's relationship with Google. So you're going to rely on Google Images,
right? Yeah, good point.
For your data. Like, come on, you can't go there. Like you're the United Nations. What else do you have to do? This is a major story, right? The whole reason like we're putting in sanctions and trade sanctions and all of this stuff is because of the Uyghur genocide. Like if that's the reason, go there and disprove it or prove it one way or the other. Yeah. Instead, you go on Google.
Yeah, because basically in that photo, you're saying there's never been any rain there since it's gone. There's never been any wind. There's never been anything to even cover up a little piece of that stuff that was showing because it looks like somebody just took an eraser in Photoshop and erased it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does look like that.
Okay, so what about forced labor? That's another thing we hear about, right? Well, the United Nations found that these VETC camps had vocational training. And they also found that, this is a quote, many of the trainees who've completed their studies in educational and training centers have gone on to find employment in factories or enterprises. That's forced labor, you guys. You train someone for a job, and then they go take a job in that field, right? Is that forced labor? According to the UN, it is, right? It says number 121, like the close link between the labor schemes and this counter extremism framework means that these people are pushed into these vocations that maybe they don't want to be, right? I mean, what they wanted to be was presumably terrorists, and then we trained them to be like printers, and then they became printers, and that's forced labor. It's like if a prisoner in America is trained in the laundry and then takes a civilian job in the laundry, forced labor.
Yeah, like
right?
we still have children in Guantanamo Bay that we rounded up. Like 15 years. Like they're still in Gitmo.
Right.
Like they're still in prisons. Like what kind of rehabilitation are we doing of these terrorists that maybe weren't even terrorists? They were the children of terrorists.
Right. About the detention facilities, right? Again, the United Nations goes to Google Images. Can we go forward 2 slides? They say, well, look at these buildings. These were detention facilities in 2018. It's on the left of your screen. And then on 2020, a lot more buildings there, right?
Thanks, Google Earth.
Again, that's what 10th graders do is they Google it. They did not ask. They do not go there. Nothing in this report is from firsthand seeing, right? And then finally, the thing that we were told is that they survey them, right? Too much surveillance of their communications. The United Nations does say that using this counterterrorism law. They technologically investigate measures. They even go as far as to talk to the ISP. They can get their WhatsApp chats, their Snapchats, all of that stuff, right? And so they're saying this is a violation. I just wonder, have they met the CIA?
Have they met maybe they got their tools from the NSA,
right?
The American NSA for spying on Americans. Yeah, I know there's just a cynical nature in me, but like I love the holier than thou sanctimonious attitude of the United Nations.
Right.
Not even going there and issuing this report.
So, interestingly, the United Nations takes the opportunity to sum all this up with some business advice, which makes me all the more suspicious that the UN is motivated by Western interests to release a report like this. They're like, well, China should stop this, and they should stop this, then they should stop this. And then we all can look at this, take possible measures to meet responsibility to respect human rights, in your business relationships. So like, try not to do business with people you think might be involved in this. Like, is that what the United Nations should be doing? Woke capitalism? Right?
Right.
Okay, so now all of this speaks to why, we played you the clip recently, why Roger Waters of Pink Floyd had recently said on CNN that, China is not guilty of human rights abuse. Let's watch him say it for himself.
You can't have a conversation about human rights and you can't have a conversation about Taiwan without actually doing the reading.
Roger, if you're having a conversation about human rights, at the top of the list of offenders are the Chinese. Why is it always the Western world?
At the top of your list.
Why is it
the
always
Chinese
the Western
didn't
world?
invade Iraq and kill 1 million people in 2003. In fact, as far as I can recall, hang on a minute, who have the Chinese invaded and murdered, slaughtered?
Their own.
Bollocks.
Okay.
That's absolute nonsense.
All right. So am I saying that the Uyghurs are not victims of racism and possible abuse in China? No, I'm not saying that. I have not been there. I don't know. But based on this report, clearly neither does the United Nations.
Right. All right. And then listen to other journalists who have been covering this and who say, I've been debunking these BBC reports and these others, and they'll get their hands on this UN report soon enough to debunk.
It's just very confounding considering how you've seen it splashed all over Western media. Like, look, the United Nations is condemning China, right? Without even reading it.